Good afternoon. What if every important decision we made occurred after listening to the perfect piece of music we needed to hear? What if every leader experienced being part of a performance ensemble before taking their leadership role? What if we really believed that music can be a tool to solve complex problems that exist beyond our theaters or our music halls? As topics, leadership and music do not often go together in the same corner, but when they do, they provide a powerful model for collaboration. Deep listening, diverse thought, and how important it is to create beauty in the world. In his 2008 article in the Journal of Educational Leadership, John L. Hall reminds us of the overlapping relationship that leadership and music share. He writes, an even greater similarity than their complex nature is that both leadership and music have a tremendous ability to influence. We always need influential leaders in higher education, and tonight's guest is the epitome of one. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Ronald Crutcher this evening to Wake Forest University. I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from such an extraordinary and visionary leader and have the privilege of hearing him play his cello. At this time, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Corey Walker, Interim Dean of Divinity, Wake Forest Professor of the Humanities, and Director of the Program in African American Studies, who will introduce our distinguished guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Good afternoon. In this unprecedented historical moment, when hope is a word rarely heard, and an emotion challenged daily, the time is so right to identify people who provide it. Indeed, there is hope to be found in our history and in people who have been empowered by it. People like Ronald Crutcher. Journalist and self-proclaimed child of the civil rights movement, Charlene Hunter Gault opens the foreword to Ronald Crutcher's recently published memoir, I Had No Idea You Were Black, with these poignant and prescient words on the truly Renaissance individual. Dr. Crutcher is an exemplar of those virtues that build, nourish, and sustain those noble humanist traditions of our civilization and that empower our journey toward a more just and humane world. We are indeed honored to welcome him to Wake Forest University for this afternoon's program. Today's program will feature music by Dr. Crutcher, accompanied by Dr. Joanne Kahn, and a public conversation between Dr. Crutcher and myself on his recently published memoir, I Had No Idea You Were Black, Navigating Race on the Road to Leadership. A national leader in higher education, a distinguished classical musician, and an accomplished academic leader. Ronald Crutcher was the 10th president of the University of Richmond, serving the university from 2015 through 2021. He is also currently University Professor of Music at the University of Richmond. Dr. Crutcher is also President Emeritus of Wheaton College in Massachusetts. As president from 2004 to 2014, he raised the institution's profile, increased enrollment and diversity of the student body, created new interdisciplinary faculty positions in academic programs, and ensured the institution's financial stability during a challenging economic period for all of higher education. Dr. Crutcher also served as Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at his alma mater, Miami University of Ohio. A former member of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra and several other symphonies, Dr. Crutcher serves on the board of the Richmond Symphony and has served on the boards of the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Berklee College of Music. Earlier in his career, he was president of the Chamber Music America, director of the highly ranked Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin, and dean of the conservatory at the Cleveland Institute of Music. Dr. Crutcher is accompanied this afternoon by accomplished pianist and harpsichordist, Dr. Joanne Kahn. Dr. Kahn captures the attention of audiences in compelling performances that celebrate the vibrancy and eloquence of musical expression. Embracing a broad range of repertoire from Baroque to contemporary music, her performances have been praised for great finesse and flexibility by the Washington Post, superb playing by Boston Globe, and superb artistry by the San Antonio Express News. The New York Times calls her playing sensitive. Her versatility includes a number of works, and she is the first artist to release a harpsichord piano recording on the Goldberg and Diabelli variations on the Brioso label. Dr. Kahn is also director of the accompanying and chamber music programs at the University of Richmond. In addition to her musical accomplishments, she's also a well-known vegan. She's also an animal rights activist and environmental justice advocate around the globe. Her TEDx talk, The Power of Plant-Based Eating, filmed at the University of Richmond in 2016, has over 900,000 views. And she is the editor of the 2021 book, Vegan Voices, Essays by Inspiring Changemakers. She's also appeared in the major documentary narrated by Kate Winslet, Eating Our Way to Extinction. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ronald A. Crutcher, accompanied by Dr. Joanne Kahn.
Thank you very much, Professor Walker, for that kind introduction. It's indeed a pleasure for us to be here with you this afternoon. The first piece is a very special piece to me. It's the first composition that I studied with my cello professor, Elizabeth Pottiger, who heard me perform at a competition at Miami University when I was 15 years old, was very impressed that I could play so well after only having played the cello for a year, and offered to teach me free of charge if my parents would get me from Cincinnati to Oxford. So it has a very special place in my heart. The next piece is a sonata by Beethoven. It's one of his 5 sonatas for cello and piano, Opus 5, number 2 in G minor. There are 3 movements, although there's not much of a break between the first and the second movement. The first movement is a very slow, kind of rhythmic movement superimposed on a beautiful, languid melody. The second movement is more of an allegro, a faster, forward-moving movement. And the last movement is a rondo, kind of a frolicking rondo. I think you'll enjoy it. So I'm going to introduce the next two pieces in a row. The first is from the Schumann Fantasy Pieces. These were pieces that were written by Robert Schumann, who was a 19th century composer, originally written for clarinet and piano, but as was often the case of composers in the 19th century, in order to make more money, they would often transcribe the works for other instruments. And so he transcribed it for cello as well. And I think it's become one of the mainstays of the cello repertoire. We're going to play just the first movement, which is Zart und mit Ausdruck, which means sweet and with expression. Oh, I forgot the other piece. The last piece is the Debussy Sonata. So the Debussy Sonata was originally intended by Claude Debussy, a French composer, late 19th century French composer who died around 1917, I believe. He had planned to write 6 sonatas for diverse instruments, 6 sonates pour divers instruments. However, he died after writing 3. And so there is a violin sonata, there's a sonata for flute and harp, and then there's the cello sonata. Of course, not being prejudiced, I think the cello sonata is the best. But it's a very different style of music, very ethereal sounding. He was one of the composers who paid allegiance, if you will, to the impressionistic artists. So we'll play the first movement of the Debussy Sonata as well.
we have you doing double duty today. Well, thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. And I want to begin our conversation by first highlighting the title of your memoir. I had no idea you were Black, navigating race on the road to leadership. Where'd you get that title from?
Well, actually, that was not the original, that was not the intended title, at least my intended title. It was suggested by my editor, and I'll tell you the story. I mean, when I was the head of the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin, I had been trying to get in contact with a foundation that gave scholarships for violinists, and it took me 2 years to get the appointment. I got the appointment. I went down to Houston. The head of the foundation was an oil executive, and basically, just as after shaking his hand as I was lowering myself to my seat, he looked at me and he said, "I had no idea you were Black." And initially, I was really angry. But then I thought, you know, my father always taught us that if someone says something to you that knocks you off your feet, don't respond right away. Take a deep breath and listen. And in the next breath, he said, "Perhaps you can help me." He said, "My wife and I have been going to the Aspen Music Festival for over 30 years, and we rarely see any Black violinists. Why is that?" We had this really great conversation because I was there to raise money, and I told him about a Black violinist at the university who had come from the Cleveland Institute of Music, not because I was there, but her parents actually relocated to their home state of Texas. And she's now in the Cleveland Orchestra, by the way. And you know, we had a great conversation, and I got the money that I was looking for. And I usually use this as a cautionary tale with my mentees, you know, because they're of course shocked when I tell them the story. And I say, "Well, how might you have responded?" You know, well, we know how they would have responded, I think. But you know, the thing is, I say to them, if I had acted on my initial impulse and gotten upset, I perhaps would not have gotten the money for this student who needed the money. So that's where the title came from. My original title was very boring compared to this.
This title does jump out at you, and I know when I read your introduction, the bio, and I said, I wonder how folks will respond to, I had no idea you were Black. But in rehearsing that story, you talked about your father. Mm-hmm. And in this memoir, you really talk about your formation of your parents and how they really shape your outlook on leadership. Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about your family formation.
Absolutely. And you know, and I will say, as a disclaimer, that when I was growing up, I absolutely did not like my father. I thought he was very, very hard on us. And now, as an adult, and I was able to tell him this before he passed away, long before he passed away. You know, so my mother and father both grew up in the same little burg south of Richmond, Kentucky, a little place called Peytontown. There's now an exit on I-75, but otherwise you would miss it. It's that small. My father fell in love with my mother when he was a teenager. And then they moved to Cincinnati. She moved first, then he moved. Neither of them graduated from high school. My father, because he was the oldest male of 10 children, and had to work on the tobacco farm. His father made him quit school in 8th grade, and he did not want. My father loved school. My mother, on the other hand, was very bright, but according to my aunt, her Irish twin, she was bored in school. And so when she got to high school, she would skip school and go to the movies and meet the bus at the end of the day. So eventually she quit and worked for a family who then subsequently moved to Northern Ohio. I grew up always thinking my mother followed my father to Cincinnati. It was just the other way around. My mother went first, and then my father just said to his dad one day, "I'm leaving, I'm out of here." And with $3 in his pocket, after he paid for his train ticket, he went to Cincinnati, Ohio. The rest is history. They were married. She was 19 and he was 21 when they got married. He was very persistent. I'll tell you another story. My mother on the weekends would stay with my grandmother's aunt in Cincinnati, and my father would go to visit her. And my mother would, these are all stories told to me by my aunt who just passed away at age 98 last fall. My mother would get up and pretend she was going to the bathroom and not come back. She'd go out to the movies with her friends. but Andrew J. Crutcher Jr. persisted, and they got married. So our household, there were two of us for many years. My mother and father were married in 1942. My father went off to the war within a month of their getting married. Didn't come back to 45. I was born in February of 47. My brother in January of 48. So we overlapped for a while. A very regimented household. But that's what I didn't like as a child, But in retrospect, it instilled discipline in me. And then my father was a leader in the church, and we were very active in the church as well. And so you know about the Progressive National Baptist Convention, for instance. That was association that was founded at my church in 1961, and I was there. But my father was a scout leader. He was a leader in the church. And even though I did not like the work that my dad did, he worked at the Cincinnati Millicron and eventually became the first black manager there. But he started out, he worked in a factory, it was, not something I wanted to do necessarily. But I watched him. I observed the way he interacted with the men at the church, where he was in a leadership position. At his workplace, they had a lodge for the men. He was one of the leaders there. And so, from him, I gained intrinsically, even though in a sense there was a little resistance there, a lot of leadership skills. From my mother, and my parents, by the way, were totally opposite. My mother was an introvert, very docile. She spoke the King's language. My father mutilated the King's language and didn't care. But my mother never corrected us. Never corrected my mother. Let me back up. My mother never said to us, "Don't speak like your father," but she would always correct our grammar. She would always correct our pronunciation in a motherly kind of way. And so I have those two personalities in me. I have A.J. Crutcher Jr. and I also have Ronald Miller Crutcher inside of me. And when A.J. Crutcher shows up, watch out.
We talked about your family formation, but in telling that story, you really also discuss the church.
Yes.
And faith formation.
Right.
Talk to us a bit about how faith
Yes.
Has influenced your leadership and how faith has shaped your life.
Well, it was family first and then the faith. I joined the church, Zion Baptist Church, which at the time was the largest black Baptist church in Cincinnati, Ohio, when I was 7 years old. And I can't tell you why I joined the church. I felt really connected to the church and felt I wanted to be, saved, I guess. And I was very active in the church. My musical career, in a sense, started in the church. And then I started singing there at the age of 6, singing solos and things. And I didn't realize I had musical talent. And then I also was exposed to people like Dr. Martin Luther King, who used to come to our church several times a year, Theo Gardner Taylor, Wyatt T. Walker, Howard Thurman. Many great speakers came because Reverend Booth was very well connected in that world. And I also got to meet Coretta Scott King early on. She came to sing a recital at the church, and my minister's wife, because I had just begun to play the cello, took me by the arm because she wanted me to meet Mrs. King. And I remember Mrs. King said to me, keep practicing. New York Philharmonic just appointed their first black player, and Sanford Allen was, whom I got to know years later. And this is an interesting story. Many, many years later, so I was like 15 at that time. In 1993, when I went through Leadership Cleveland, the head of the Leadership Cleveland took the entire class to Atlanta for them to experience what it was like to be in a city that was run by black leadership. And at the end of the day, we went to the King Center, and Margot Copeland, who was heading it up, asked me if I would give a gift to Mrs. King. And we were at the Carter Gardens at the time. So I'm thinking, should I tell this story? I was a little, didn't know how she would feel about the age differential. But finally, I mustered up the courage to tell the story. She was really moved by it. Because I said, really, it was that encounter where I first began thinking about becoming a professional musician. I encountered with her. And lo and behold, when I was going through all my photographs, I found a photograph that someone had taken of me in 1993 at the King Center with Mrs. King standing next to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just very, very special. So the church, means a lot to me, meant a lot to me, still does. I, at one point, thought I would become a minister. And really, as a child, I mean, people I looked up to were my minister, Reverend Booth, Dr. King, Howard Thurman, and Peter Marshall, the former chaplain of Congress, because when I used to go to the library quite a bit, it was in our neighborhood, and the librarian once, I don't even know what motivated her. She handed me this book. She said, I think you'll enjoy this book. It was called A Man Called Peter by Catherine Marshall. And I was fascinated by his life and the way he was able to move people and really help people transcend the vicissitudes of daily lives, including politicians, right?
That's right.
And so, he was a very strong influence. I wanted to be just like him.
In my household, we had the 3 F's: family, faith, and football. It's quite different. But it seems that there's 3 M's in your memoir. There's the various ministries that have shaped you and formed you. Music, of course. But there's the last M, mentoring, that came at a very young age.
You're good.
Prompter school. Talk to us about the importance of mentoring and your experience of it, and then I want to expand on it. But first I want to talk about the experience of mentoring for you.
Well, you heard me say when I introduced when I talked about the first piece, that this professor at Miami University offered to teach me free of charge when I was 15 years old. And I'd have to I'd take the bus at 7:40 in the morning for Cincinnati, go up to Oxford, and I wouldn't get back until 6 o'clock in the evening. And so I was able to observe her. And what I found really amazing about her was that she was doing some of the same things that I thought I wanted to do as a minister, but through music. She was ministering. I mean, each student she interacted with in a different way. She was making a difference in the lives of students. She introduced me after going for lessons for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. We went to Indiana, and she said, I'm taking you here. She got my parents' permission to meet a famous musical family, the Klemperer family. Erika Klemperer at the time was 12, and I was 15. And Erika Klemperer and I played in a trio together called the Klemperer Trio for 37 years with her husband, Gordon Back. They live in England. I live here. So that was kind of, for me, a foundational experience. Seeing that this woman who had plenty to do felt strongly enough about my musical talent that she wanted to teach me free of charge. And so as I watched her life, she played in a quartet, I thought, this is a great life. I can make a contribution to helping young people by being a university professor. And so that's when I squarely decided I want to become a university professor, not thinking whatsoever anything about becoming an administrator of any sort. And as I look out throughout my life, actually when I was writing this memoir, there were times when I would just say to myself, boy, how lucky you have been, how fortunate, because things would just happen. Everyone wants to know, how did you become a president? Well, because of one of my mentors. One of my mentors, Bryce Stewart, former president of Penn State University, when I was head of the School of Music at the University of Texas, randomly, well, it wasn't quite random, he said he was taking me to lunch to talk about the upcoming campaign. But as we sat down for lunch, he looked at me and he said, it's obvious to me that you're going to become a University of College president. Have you thought about the kind of University of College where you want to become president? I almost fell off my seat. because I hadn't thought about becoming the president. So I said to him, well, probably not a place as large as UT Austin at that time, 50,000 students. Probably a small liberal arts college. And after lunch, I remember thinking to myself, why did you give him that response? What was it? I mean, what? So I went to the bookstore and I found a very interesting book that many of you may know by Lauren Pope called Colleges That Changed Lives, 40 schools that you should consider outside of the Ivy League. And in the introduction to the book, it said, these colleges transformed the lives of the students who attended them. I thought, that's the kind of place where I'd want to become a president if I were a president. And so, you know, I mean, I've had so many different mentors, but Bryce Jordan was the one who set me up. I mean, this man, as I said, it came out of nowhere. And then after we had the conversation, he started nominating me for presidencies. This was 1996. And so the first one, I'll tell you another story. The first place was Sarah Lawrence College. So he did a mock interview with me, and after the mock interview, he said, okay, what do you think your chances are of getting this position? I don't have any illusions. I don't expect to get the position, but I hope to do well enough so that the search firm will want to nominate me for other positions. Good, he said, because he said, if I could tell you something. Bryce Jordan was the first musician, by the way, to become president of a large university, Penn State University. He said, if I could tell you the number of times I was a bridesmaid, and he ticked off like 9 schools. I'm thinking, oh my goodness. But he gave me, and me and my wife, Dr. Betty Neal Crutcher, such good advice. I mean, he continued to be there for me until he passed away at age 93. And those are only 2 examples. I could write a whole book just about my mentors. And so that's why it's important to me to serve as a mentor for others. Now I have the pleasure of mentoring new presidents, you know, and I mean, Betty will tell you, occasionally I get off of a Zoom call and I said, this is the easiest money I've ever made in my life. I'm loving it. This is really terrific because I'm able to offer insights to them that seem obvious to me, but are not obvious to them.
You talk about being a college president, not just as an administrator or academic leader. There's a deep-rooted passion about it. And that passion is about the ability for transformation. And in many ways, one of your traits has been to use the college to leverage its convening space for us to really understand and listen to diverse viewpoints. Talk to us how your cultivation of the ear, your ear for listening, the ear for music, has enabled you to create and curate these spaces in higher education to really sort of cultivate the ability of listening to students and to a broad college audience.
Well, you know, it's something that I don't know that growing up as a young string player I was aware of what I was doing, but what I realize in retrospect is that one of the reasons I'm very comfortable having conversations across difference, conversations that are difficult, is that when you're in a chamber music group with someone, there's not a conductor making decisions for you. You have to make the decisions. You have to talk to your players. And you know, often back in the 60s, when I was in Roots, I'd be the only black player there. And so, you know, if you want to have a role to play in the interpretation of the piece, you have to speak up. And then the other thing I will tell you, so that was kind of intrinsic, but I didn't really start thinking about why I had this particular mindset and the provenance of that mindset being related to those experiences. But you know, Betty and I have been mentoring students officially since 1999. We've been mentoring all of our careers, but in '99 we started asking people, the admissions folks to put together a men's group for me and a women's group for her. And what we have noticed over the years is how the difficulty students have in interacting with each other in authentic ways, particularly around sensitive topics and subjects. So I think in a university or a college, as president, if you want the community to be one a truly intercultural community where there is authentic conversation across difference, you have to model that yourself to begin with. And then you have to put things in practices and programs in place that will help students and everyone else learn how to do that. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And it's a long-term kind of long-term work. But particularly now, this particular moment that we're experiencing in our American democracy, it's more important than ever before. And I will tell you, I'm a part of 3 different groups made up of presidents and former presidents that are focusing on this very issue. That is how to ensure that our students, all of our students, are comfortable having conversations across, dialogue across difference about difficult topics, and at the same time are aware and informed about American history and our democracy so that they can become engaged citizens when they leave. I mean, one of my mentees, who's now finishing his degree at the Batten School at University of Virginia, once said in one of our conversations, he said, actually, our 4 years on this residential campus are really a crucible for learning how to be engaged citizens when we leave, which should be the case for every university. But it's not something, again, it's not something you take for granted, and as a leader, you have to be really intentional and use the bully pulpit, quite frankly.
Well, Ron, I know we could continue our conversation all evening, and it's been truly wonderful having you here. And I'd like to end our conversation pulling from a story you wrote in your memoir. And of course, in that story was a time when you were at Yale, and you were facing a difficult moment. And you received a bit of a meditation. You received a meditation from a good friend, a good mentor, from Howard Thurman. And I want to close our conversation reading part of that meditation that you received from Howard Thurman at a difficult moment when you were at Yale as a graduate student. And it really serves as a moment of reflection and an opportunity for us to develop that resolve to continue on. It's from Howard Thurman's wonderful little book, Meditations of the Heart. And it is number 15, his meditation, Keep Alive the Dream in the Heart. And part of that meditation reads as follows. As long as a person has a dream in her heart, she cannot lose the significance of living. It is part of the pretensions of modern life to traffic in what is generally called realism. There is much insistence upon being practical and down to earth. Such things as dreams are wont to be regarded as romantic or as a badge of immaturity or as escape hatches for the human spirit. When such a mood or attitude is carefully scrutinized, it is found to be made up largely of pretensions and short of bluff. People cannot continue long to live if the dream in the heart has perished. It is then that they stop hoping, stop looking, and the last embers of the anticipations fade away. The dream is the quiet persistence in the heart that enables a person to ride out the storms of their churning experiences. It is the exciting whisper moving through the aisles of the spirit, answering the monotony of limitless days of dull routine. It does not take its rise from the environment in which one moves or functions. It lives in the inward parts. It is deep within, where the issues of life and death are ultimately determined. Keep alive the dream, for as long as a person has a dream in her heart, she cannot lose the significance of living. Thank you for your witness, Thank you for your mentoring. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your music. And thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to your last performance with you and Joanne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.